It happened in 4 seconds. I was parked outside Westfield Academy on a gray Tuesday afternoon, engine running, eyes fixed on the school gates. The bell had just rung. Students spilled out in the usual rush, backpacks swinging, phones appearing before feet hit the pavement. Then I saw the van. Dark blue. No plates. Engine idling too quietly for a vehicle that size. My eyes found it without instruction, an old reflex I had tried to quiet for years but never fully managed. My name is Kate Walsh. To the neighbors in Millbrook who waved from their driveways, I was a quiet woman who worked from home, fixed her own gutters, and baked lemon cake for the block parties. 7 years I had spent building that version of myself, layering it carefully, like fresh plaster over something much harder underneath. The other version of me saw a targeting vehicle and recognized it in under a second. I was reaching for my coffee when Zoe walked through the gates. She was laughing at her phone, dark braids bouncing, yellow backpack as lopsided as ever. My daughter, 16 years old, wonderfully unaware of everything her mother was hiding. The van rolled forward. 2 men came out fast, practiced, no wasted movement. Zoe barely had time to scream. Her phone dropped and cracked against the pavement, face up, camera still running. For just 1 second, she found me across the street. The van door slammed. I did not run. I reached into the glove compartment and picked up the burner phone. My hands were steady. They always were, even when the rest of me wasn't. I dialed the number I had memorized years ago and promised myself I would never use. It connected on the first ring. Walsh. A man's voice. Flat and careful, the voice of someone trained not to react. They made contact early, I said. My voice was lower than I expected, controlled, but with a tremor underneath that I swallowed before it could surface. A pause. I heard a door close on his end. How early? Outside her school. Daylight. 2 men, dark blue van, no plates. It was planned, this was not random. Are you following? No. They'll expect that. I watched the van turn left at the far end of Fairview Road and disappear behind the old Ridgeback Water Tower, 43 seconds since they had taken her. My fingers pressed hard against the burner phone. 7 years. 7 years of school runs, grocery lists, lemon cake, and a locked drawer in my kitchen that nobody had ever asked about. 7 years of Millbrook and gutters and Tuesday afternoons, all of it built to contain a different life that had apparently not agreed to stay contained. Walsh. The voice sharpened. You're compromised. Those 2 words landed the way stones land in still water, heavy and rippling outward. I knew exactly what they meant. I ended the call. I sat in the quiet street for 3 more seconds. Then I put the car in drive. I got home before anyone could see me brake. The house looked ordinary in the way I had worked hard to make it look: white fence, hanging flower basket, the welcome mat Zoe had picked out 2 years ago that said home sweet home in letters already starting to fade. I went through the front door, locked it, and stood in the kitchen. Then I let myself cry. 11 seconds. I always counted. It was a habit formed in places where emotion was a liability, a reflex that had kept me alive more than once. 11 seconds, then I pressed my palms flat against the counter, steadied my breathing, and went to work. Behind the cleaning supplies under the sink, past the spare sponges and extra dish soap, there was a panel that looked like part of the cabinet. I pressed the right corner and heard the click. Inside, 3 untraceable phones, a folded map of the Millbrook metro area, 2 bundles of cash, and a flat plastic case. Inside the case were 4 passports. I laid them out on the counter. Different names, different photographs, different countries of issue. But the oldest one, the one with the cracked laminate edge, held a photograph that was undeniably mine. The name on that passport was not Kate Walsh. I had not looked at that name in 7 years. Now I looked at it for a long time, running my thumb slowly across it. Then I put it in my jacket pocket. Zoe had never heard that name. That was about to change. Inside the van, Zoe was not panicking. I know that now. She told me everything afterward, scene by scene, in the careful, detailed way that made my chest pull tight with equal parts pride and guilt. But in that moment, I was still in my kitchen, and all I had was what I imagined. She said the two men didn't speak to her at first. They sat across from each other and argued in low voices while she sat against the far wall, wrists zip-tied, watching. This wasn't the plan, the younger one said. He was maybe late 20s, with a thin scar above his left eyebrow. His voice had a nervous edge. We weren't supposed to move until Thursday. Orders changed, the older one said flatly. Zoe memorized everything, the words, the tension between them, the smell of the van, how many turns they made and in which direction. I had never told her why I taught her to do that. I had framed it as a game since she was small. She had played along every time. The younger man, the one with the scar, moved to the far side of the van. He turned his back to his partner, raised his phone, and quietly took a photograph of Zoe. She watched him type a short message and press send. She could not see who received it. But she noticed his hands were trembling, and she filed that away immediately. That detail, she told me later, felt like the most important one. There is a building on the corner of Holt Street and 9th Avenue that most people in Millbrook walk past without a second thought. It has the bland exterior of a logistics company, muted gray signage, tinted windows, an entry panel that nobody seems to use. Anybody looking at it would see nothing worth stopping for. That was the intention. I arrived at dusk, changed into dark jeans and a plain gray jacket. No jewelry. Flat shoes. I walked with my shoulders slightly forward, the way you walk when you want a city to forget it saw you. The entry panel beeped when I pressed my thumb to it. A lock clicked open. Inside, two plainclothes agents moved to intercept me before I reached the second set of doors. The first one, tall, rigid, had his hand already shifting toward his holster. Then he looked at my face. He stopped. He looked at his partner. His partner looked at me. The hallway fell very quiet. She's back, the first agent said. He said it softly, the way someone says something they cannot quite believe they are seeing. I walked past them both without responding. Director Alan Harmon was waiting in the third-floor briefing room. He looked older, heavier around the eyes, slower to straighten when I came in. But his voice was exactly as I remembered it, measured, controlled, the voice of a man who had trained himself never to show surprise. You weren't supposed to have a family, he said. I sat down across from him. Tell me where my daughter is. Harmon took a slow breath. There was already a file on the table, thin, unmarked, the kind that doesn't officially exist. He opened it without pushing it toward me, which told me he was still deciding what to share. 6 years ago, he began, you were inserted into the Crane network. Deep cover. 18 months of groundwork. You were 4 weeks from a conclusive identification when you went dark. I know what I did, I said. You vanished. No exit signal, no flag drop, no final report. We assumed you were dead. He paused. Some people assumed something worse. I let that sit without responding. What no one here knew, what even I didn't know until 72 hours ago, is that you had a daughter before the insertion. That she had been living here under a protected identity ever since. Her name is Zoe, I said. She is 16 years old. She has nothing to do with any of this. Harmon slid the file across the table. Walsh. His voice dropped. This kidnapping, the van, the school, the timing, it carries every signature of a Crane network operation. The same patterns we documented before you disappeared. I looked at the file without opening it. My real name was printed across the header. Agent Miriam Walsh. Classified. Eyes only. I had not seen those words in 7 years. You're saying they found her, I said. Harmon nodded carefully. We think this kidnapping is connected to your old case. I opened the file. While I was reading, the van was arriving somewhere it was never supposed to go. Zoe told me the drive lasted about 40 minutes. They stopped twice, once abruptly, as if the driver had spotted something unexpected, and once at what she believed was a traffic light because she could hear the signal clicking. She counted the seconds between each turn and stored them quietly behind her eyes. When the doors opened, they led her into a building that smelled of old wood and engine grease. Dim lighting. A corridor with too many doors. The scar-faced man kept one hand near her arm but never grabbed her harshly, a detail she registered immediately. They put her in a back room. Single cot. Boarded window. A camping lantern already lit in the corner. She sat down and started counting ceiling tiles. 22. Then the door to an adjoining room opened. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was around 50, silver hair, plain dark jacket, no tie. He moved with the calm, deliberate slowness of someone completely accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room he entered. He crossed toward Zoe and studied her face the way you study a photograph you are trying to match to a memory. He looked at her jaw. Her eyes. The shape of her brow. Then he turned away. "This isn't the address on the list," the scar-faced man said behind him. "No," the older man said quietly. "It isn't." He looked back at Zoe one more time. And then he said her name. The man's name was Victor Crane. I did not know that yet. I was still in the Holt Street briefing room, reading a file with outdated information, while Victor stood in a dim building 40 minutes from Millbrook and studied my daughter as if confirming something he had long suspected. He looked at her for a long moment. The scar-faced man, whose name I would later learn was Arlo, stood near the door. The older kidnapper had gone to check the exits. They were alone with Zoe, and Victor seemed in no particular hurry. He tilted his head slightly. Zoe told me later she saw something shift behind his eyes, not warmth, not kindness. More like surprise. A calculation adjusting for new information. "She looks like her," he said, almost to himself. Arlo frowned. "Like who?" Victor didn't answer. He stepped into the hallway and pulled out a black phone, dialing from memory. When the line connected, his voice was completely even. Unhurried. As if reporting the weather. "We may have just taken the agent's daughter." A pause. "Yes." "The Walsh girl." A longer pause. "No." "We proceed carefully. She is more useful than anticipated." He ended the call and stood perfectly still in the hallway for a moment, alone with whatever he was deciding. In the room behind him, Zoe had already started mapping the space, door hinges, the gap beneath the adjoining door, the way the floorboard creaked in the far left corner. She was her mother's daughter. I refused backup. Harmon argued for 11 minutes. He put both palms flat on the table and told me in precise language that operating without a team was against protocol, against common sense, and against every lesson the Bureau had ever tried to teach me. He was correct on all 3 counts. "I know how they move," I said. "Their perimeter logic, their location patterns, how they respond to pursuit. If a team comes in behind me, they'll split. You'll lose the entire network again, just like 6 years ago. Walsh. Check-ins every 2 hours. If I miss 2 consecutive contacts, send everyone." He did not like it. He held my gaze for a long moment, then stepped back. I moved through Millbrook quickly, on foot where possible, doubling back twice to check for a tail. The Crane network placed watchers in predictable locations, so I used the service alley grid I had spent 14 months memorizing, streets they would not think to watch. 90 minutes after leaving Holt Street, I found the van. It was on a dead-end service road behind the old Fairfield paper mill, unlocked, abandoned, doors wide open. Not hidden. Switched vehicles meant a second location already prepared well in advance. Professional. Organized. I pulled on thin gloves and climbed inside. The van was cold and smelled of fuel. Nothing on the seats, nothing in the storage well beneath the floor panel. Then I saw it, half tucked against the base of the rear wall. Zoe's phone. Screen cracked, battery nearly gone. Still on. Still recording. I sat in the back of the empty van and watched 43 minutes of footage on a cracked screen. For the first several minutes it was mostly floor. The phone had landed face up at an angle, catching a partial view of the lower wall and a section of Zoe's sneakers. But within 5 minutes of arriving in the van, she had spotted it. She found a way to adjust its position with her foot, barely moving, keeping the action invisible to the men seated across from her. Just a small shift in angle. Just enough. On the footage, I watched her change position each time one of the kidnappers moved, pretending discomfort, adjusting her back, sliding slightly, so the camera would follow. I watched her silently count the van's turns, lips moving faintly. I watched her study the men without looking at them directly. My chest tightened until breathing was difficult. "That's my girl," I whispered. I almost missed it. At the 38-minute mark, just as the van was slowing and the older kidnapper leaned toward the front, Arlo turned and faced Zoe directly. The phone caught his face in clear, steady light. I paused the footage. I knew that face. Not from any file Harmon had shown me. From before, from inside the Crane network, from a meeting I attended 6 years ago under a false identity. He had been younger then. Lower in the operation. Someone I had never managed to name. But he had seen my face too. He knew exactly who Kate Walsh really was. Memory doesn't return in order. That's the nature of deep cover work. You compartmentalize everything so completely, names, faces, locations, the lies you tell over breakfast to people who could have you killed, that when you finally stop, the pieces don't line up cleanly. They surface at unexpected moments. While paying for groceries. While watching Zoe sleep. While sitting in the back of an empty van on a cold service road, holding a cracked phone. I remember the Pelham District building, 6 floors, freight elevator, 4th floor blacked out. I remember the alias I used, the contact names given to me, a supplier, a logistics coordinator, 2 men who handled movement between cities. No real names. Nobody in that organization used real names. I remember getting close. 14 months in, I had made contact with the man behind everything, the one who ran the network from a clean distance, whose real identity even his own people didn't know unless they had been with him from the very start. One name surfaced over those 14 months, spoken only in fragments. Crane. For weeks from identifying him conclusively, everything changed. I made a decision outside protocol. A choice that cost me my career and gave me Zoe. Now Crane had surfaced again, 6 years later, with my daughter in a room 40 minutes outside Millbrook. I closed the footage, slid the phone into my jacket, and stepped out of the van. Whatever had gone unfinished 6 years ago was unfinished no longer. Zoe didn't know his name. But she was already watching him. The silver-haired man, Victor, had returned to the outer room after his phone call, leaving just Arlo and the older kidnapper with her. The older man sat by the door with his arms crossed, expression flat. Arlo had settled near the boarded window, turning a small coin over and over in his fingers. She told me later she watched him for nearly an hour before he moved. He stood slowly, the way someone stretches after a long sit. He walked to the corner farthest from the older man's line of sight and crouched near the cot where Zoe sat. Then he did something she hadn't expected at all. He reached behind her wrists and loosened the zip tie. Not enough to free her, just enough to restore circulation, to stop the deep ache that had been building since the van. He worked quickly, silently, eyes moving from her to the door and back. Zoe looked at him. He looked back. He glanced once more at the door. Then he spoke, barely above a breath, as if each word was costing him something. "Your mother," he said slowly, "she saved my life once." Zoe stared at him. He didn't say anything else. He stood, crossed back to the window, and resumed turning the coin as if nothing had happened. But the tie around her wrists was loose, and Zoe now held more information than any of them realized she had. After that, Zoe started testing everything. She did it the way I had taught her, through years of conversations I had always called games. What do you do if you are lost somewhere unfamiliar? What do you notice first when you walk into a new room? If you needed to leave a place quickly, what would you look for? She had always thought they were just games. I had never told her otherwise. Now she used every single one. She counted the paces from the cot to the door, 12. The floorboard third from the right was loose, creaking under any weight, so she rerouted around it mentally. The older kidnapper checked the hallway door every 20 minutes, regular as a clock. The camping lantern had perhaps 4 more hours of fuel remaining. And she confirmed what she had suspected since Arlo loosened her wrists. He was not loyal to the people around him. His eyes moved the wrong way, not scanning for threats from outside, but watching the older man, watching the wall between them and Victor. Each time Victor's voice came through that wall, Arlo went very still in the way a person goes still when they are calculating a risk and have not yet decided which way to fall. He was afraid of Victor. But he was not on Victor's side. Zoe was 16, and she understood people the way I had always quietly hoped she would. She filed this away without showing any change in her expression. She just had to wait for the right moment. I found the location in the last 90 seconds of footage. At the 41-minute mark, just before the low battery warning appeared, Zoe had made one final adjustment, tilting the phone toward the upper corner of the van wall where a narrow strip of light came through a gap near the roof panel. Most people would have seen nothing useful in that strip of light. I paused the footage and looked carefully. In the upper edge of the frame, partially cut off, partially obscured, was a water tower. Distinct silhouette. A rusted horizontal band around the middle at roughly the 2/3 mark, the old Ridgeback water tower on the eastern edge of Millbrook. I had mapped every structure within half a mile of it during my first 6 months undercover. 3 abandoned buildings matched the profile, isolated, multiple exits, large enough to hold people without drawing attention from the road. I narrowed it to the most likely one in under a minute. Then I did something that went against every instinct I had. I didn't go straight in. I needed them to watch one entrance and not think about the others. The only way to do that was to confirm my presence without attacking, to let them see me coming without letting them see what I had planned. I walked past a security camera half a block from the building. I let my reflection appear in a shop window, which the network was known to monitor. I did not hide. Inside those walls, they were already adjusting positions. They had been waiting for me too. I walked into the building at 11:47 at night. The front entrance had been left unlocked. That single detail told me more than anything else that evening. They were not afraid of me arriving. They had prepared for it. I moved through a dim loading area, past collapsed shelving units, into a wide interior corridor that smelled of dust and cold machinery. My footsteps made no sound. There was a light at the far end of the corridor. I approached the doorway and stopped. Victor Crane stepped forward from the center of the room. He was exactly as I had built him in my imagination over 14 months, older now, but composed with the particular stillness of someone who had never doubted this moment would eventually come. Plain dark jacket. Hands loose at his sides. Almost relaxed. Behind him, 2 men stood at measured intervals against the wall. The older kidnapper was on the left. Arlo was on the right, and when his eyes met mine, they carried something complicated that I filed away immediately. Victor looked at me the way you look at something you have been patient enough to wait a long time to see. He almost smiled. "You finally came back," he said. His voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of someone who had run this conversation in his head already and was not worried about how it ended. I stood in the doorway. I counted positions. Measured distances. Located the exits. "Where is she?" I said. "Safe," he said. "For now." He wanted me to understand the full picture. That was his nature. I had learned that much from the fragments I had assembled over 14 months inside his organization. Victor Crane did not simply want to win. He wanted the other person to fully comprehend that they had lost, to see every angle of it, to appreciate the precision that had gone into it. He walked slowly across the room as he spoke. "Your daughter wasn't a random selection," he said. "We have known about her for nearly 2 years. We know about Kate Walsh, the lemon cake, the gutters, the Tuesday school pickups, all of it." He stopped near the window. "She was bait. You were the target all along." I let him say it. I didn't move. When you vanished 6 years ago, you took something with you. Names, locations, transfer routes, enough to put 14 members of my organization away for the rest of their lives. We needed to finish what started then. He turned and looked at me directly. Taking your daughter was the only thing that would bring you out of that life you'd built. He made it sound entirely reasonable. That was always the method, build a cage around someone and then let them believe they chose to walk into it. 3 exits. The older kidnapper is covering the left side door. Arlo's weight is slightly off-center, turned inward rather than outward, watching the wrong direction entirely. I had not come here to run. I had come here to make certain none of them could either. It happened fast. Victor was still watching me when it started. He studied exits, not allies, the fundamental overconfidence of a man who had never needed to question the loyalty of the people beside him. That was his mistake. Arlo moved first. He turned on the older kidnapper with no warning, quick, precise, the movement of someone who had spent hours making a decision and had finally made it. The older man was completely caught off guard. They struggled. A metal table went over. The camping lantern on the shelf swung wildly, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. Victor turned, and for the first time that evening, I saw surprise on his face. From behind the wall, from the room where Zoe had been held, I heard a door open. She had heard the chaos and she had moved. The loosened zip tie. The memorized floor plan. The 12 steps to the door, rerouted around the creaking third board. She made it into the corridor in seconds. Then she ran directly into Victor. He caught her arm in one practiced motion, not violent, but completely controlled. He positioned her in front of him and his composure returned almost immediately, the surprise folding back beneath the surface. He looked across the chaos at me. "Stop," he said. I stopped. Zoe was breathing hard. But her eyes, when they found mine, were focused and completely steady. No panic. No pleading. She was waiting for my signal. I had taught her exactly what that looked like. Victor held my daughter and spoke to me like we were finishing a conversation that had only been briefly interrupted. The older kidnapper was down, out of the immediate equation. Arlo stood near the far wall with one hand pressed against a cut on his jaw, watching the back of the room, ready for whatever came next. Victor seemed unbothered by all of it. "Think carefully," he said. "I'm offering you a resolution." His grip on Zoe's arm remained firm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make the terms clear. "Your daughter walks out tonight, unharmed. You come with me. Everything you have been carrying for 6 years, the names, the routes, the information, you give it voluntarily. No trial, no exposure. No record anywhere. You disappear again, and she grows up in peace." He delivered it like a generous offer. That was always the method, build the cage around a person so carefully that they believed choosing to enter was their own idea. I looked at Zoe's face. Her eyes were moving in a tight, purposeful pattern I recognized. She had seen something behind Victor that she needed me to know about. I didn't know what yet, but I had spent 16 years learning to trust her instincts exactly as much as I trusted my own. I stepped forward. Victor's shoulders relaxed slightly. He believed I was agreeing. I let him believe that. I kept walking, steady, unhurried, directly toward him, until I was close enough to do exactly what I had come here to do. I pressed the button on my watch at exactly 12:19 in the morning. It looked like an ordinary watch, the kind you pick up at an airport gift shop without a second thought. I had been wearing it since leaving Holt Street. Harmon and I had agreed on the signal during the briefing, even as he disagreed loudly with everything else about the plan. 2 hours of delay. Triggered by that one press, federal agents came through every entrance simultaneously, the front-loading door, the side corridor, the fire access panel I had identified the moment I first walked in. They moved with the efficiency of a team that had been quietly staged and waiting, not rushing from a distance. Harmon had positioned them during the 2 hours I spent drawing Victor out. Victor heard them half a second before they reached the room. That half-second was the moment everything he had constructed over 6 years reached its end. Something shifted behind his eyes, not anger, the look of a man whose certainties had just failed him for the first time. He let go of Zoe. 2 agents entered the doorway. Victor stepped back once, then again. He looked at me. "You had backup," he said. "I had backup all along," I said. "I only delayed it." He looked at me for one more long second, this man who had spent 6 years hunting me, and I watched him understand. Every step of the night had been mine. He had never been in control at all. They dismantled Victor Crane's network before sunrise. 14 arrests across 3 cities, matching the names I had carried for 6 years. Harmon messaged at 4 in the morning, 2 words, "It's done." I did not reply. I was in a hospital waiting room with Zoe. She didn't need medical treatment, shaken, cold, exhausted, but nothing worse. She sat beside me wrapped in a paper blanket, and we were quiet for a long time. It was the first honest silence we had shared in years. Then she looked at me. Not the way she usually did, with the comfortable impatience of a teenager certain her mother worried too much. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you realize you have never fully seen them before. "Who are you?" she asked. I had been preparing that answer for 7 years and still had no clean version. I paused. Then I told her everything. Every name, every choice, every chapter of the life I had hidden beneath the white fence and the lemon cake and the Tuesday school pickups. It took a long time. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she took my hand. We had a long road ahead. But we were going to walk it honestly, together. If this story gripped you the way it gripped everyone who lived it, share it. Someone in your life needs to read it. And if you want more stories that grab you from the very first line and refuse to let go, subscribe. There is so much more to come.